Welcome to Learning English, a daily 30-minute program from the Voice of America. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson. This program is aimed at English learners, so we speak a little slower and we use words and phrases especially written for people learning English.
Today on the program, you will hear from Brian Lynn and Anna Mateo. Later, Steve Ember will present our American history series, The Making of a Nation. But first, here is Brian Lynn.
Chinese Internet users have found a way to get around government suppression of news by using blockchain technology. Blockchain is the name for an official list of transactions carried out between users belonging to the same network. Blockchain permits transaction records to be checked and stored securely. Blockchain technology has received a lot of publicity in recent years because of its relation to cryptocurrencies. A cryptocurrency is a kind of money that does not exist in the form of bills or coins. It is not overseen by banks or supported by governments. It is exchanged digitally between buyers and sellers using secret codes for security. Two of the most popular cryptocurrencies are Bitcoin and Ethereum. Cryptocurrency amounts are created by developers through a method called mining. This is when users lend computing power to record the exact same transactions to form a blockchain. Some Internet users recently turned to blockchain to publicize a Chinese vaccine scandal. A Chinese drug maker was found to have produced poor quality vaccines meant for young babies. The company was identified as Changchun Changxing, one of China's largest vaccine manufacturers. Last year, the same company was ordered to stop production of several kinds of vaccines due to poor manufacturing methods. The information was uncovered during an investigation by an unidentified reporter who published a story on the Internet. The story said Chinese officials had discovered production problems as early as November, but did not admit their findings or announce any action against the company until July. The news spread across social media in China, but the story was quickly censored by the Chinese government. Other attempts to republish the story were not successful. Several technology publications have written about how members of China's blockchain community got involved to keep the story alive. US-based technology publication The Verge reported a user of the Ethereum system moved a small amount of Ether into the user's own address. The owner of the address then added the censored vaccine article to the blockchain transaction's metadata, The Verge said. The metadata information is public. Since the Ethereum system is decentralized, it can only be controlled by the people who are part of it. This publishing method prevented Chinese government censors from blocking the story. Once the story was out, it did not take long for Chinese officials to start officially commenting on the investigation into the company's activities. At least 15 individuals connected to the company have been detained as part of the investigation. Chinese state media reported the country's Food and Drug Administration had discovered the drug maker had been falsifying production and inspection records. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said in a statement the company had violated a moral bottom line. He promised the government would strongly crack down on any violations that could endanger public safety. I'm Brian Lynn.
A new study finds that the most widely used anti-malarial treatment might not help children and pregnant women as much as other patients. The pregnant women and children studied had lower amounts of one of the treatment drugs than non-pregnant adults. The most common drugs to treat malaria are a combination of artemether and lumefantrine. Together, the combination therapy is also called ACT. This research may explain why usual doses of ACT sometimes fail to cure. The research also suggests that a change in the treatment program may help to cure more people and prevent resistance. But other experts say this study alone is not enough to change treatment recommendations. Since 2000, cases of malaria around the world have dropped by 60%. The decrease is credited to billions of dollars worth of programs to prevent and treat the disease. However, in some parts of the world, malaria is still a serious problem.
More than 400,000 people are killed every year by malaria, and actually most of them are small children below 5 years of age in the sub-Saharan regions in Africa.
That is Frank Klopraga. He is a researcher working with the Worldwide Anti-Malarial Resistance Network. He co-wrote the new study. He and other researchers examined 31 studies involving more than 4,000 people. They looked at amounts of lumefantrine in patients' blood 7 days after treatment began. They found that children and pregnant women had lower than average amounts.
Pregnant women were, for example, 20% lower, and depending on the body weight group in children, it was somewhere between 15 and 25% lower.
Pregnant women and children seem to absorb and use medicines differently. Klopraga explains that children have different levels of important enzymes, and pregnant women, he adds, have different amounts of water and fat. These can all affect how a drug works in the body.
Pregnant women also have changes in body composition. You can think about water and fat content. And this also has an impact on how the drug distributes through the body.
Some studies have found that children and pregnant women are more likely than others to develop malaria again within weeks of treatment. Klopraga says that failing to treat malaria is not the only concern. When malaria survives exposure to low amounts of anti-malarial drugs, it can change into a new strain of malaria, and that strain is resistant to anti-malarial drugs. The researchers offer a different treatment model based on their findings. They suggest that taking the pills for 5 days would be more effective than the current 3-day schedule. Andrea Bosman leads a malaria prevention and treatment department at the World Health Organization. He praises the study as well done and important. But he warns this model is based on a study and not on medical trials. He says the WHO does not generally make recommendations based on modeling studies.
It is still a modeling study, and we do not generally make recommendations based on modeling studies alone. We require clinical data.
He says longer treatment carries its own risk. He says the longer the treatment goes on, the less likely people are to continue it. Not completing a drug treatment can also add to the likelihood of resistance. Other studies have not found that a change in treatment plan is necessary. Plopraga and his team are seeking support for a medical trial of the 5-day treatment schedule. I'm Anna Matteo.
McDonald's is celebrating the 50th anniversary of its world-famous Big Mac. The Big Mac has been one of the most popular and best-selling items in the company's history. It is known for being bigger than a usual hamburger, with 2 pieces of meat separated by an extra piece of bread in the middle. It is also made with special sauce and toppings. As part of a memorable advertising campaign in the 1970s, the Big Mac's ingredients were sung to music to help keep them in people's minds.
2 all-beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
The Big Mac generally contains the same ingredients in McDonald's restaurants around the world. The Big Mac was invented in 1967 by Jim Delegati, the local operator of several McDonald's in the American state of Pennsylvania. He urged the company to let him sell the special hamburger at all the restaurants that he ran. Delegati died in 2016 at the age of 98. In a 2007 interview with Reuters, he said it took a long time to persuade McDonald's that the Big Mac was a good idea. "I felt that we needed a big sandwich," he said, "but you couldn't do anything unless they gave you permission." McDonald's finally agreed to let Delegati sell the sandwich at one of his McDonald's restaurants. The company required him to use the same bun that other McDonald's burgers were made with. For that reason, Delegati said, it did not sell well at first. When he changed to a bigger bun, topped with sesame seeds, sales of the sandwich increased by more than 12%. After similar results at other stores, McDonald's decided to add the Big Mac to all its restaurants in 1968. The Big Mac then grew to become an international food star. The Economist magazine has even used the price of the Big Mac to measure the purchasing power of different international currencies. To celebrate the Big Mac's lasting popularity, McDonald's is launching a series of collectible Mac coins. They will be available starting August 2nd around the world. The company chose that day because August 2nd would have been Jim Delegati's 100th birthday. The coins can be shared or collected. People can also trade them in for a free Big Mac. McDonald's plans to give away more than 6.2 million Mac coins in more than 50 nations. The coins come in 5 designs, each representing a different 10-year period with the Big Mac.
Welcome to the Making of a Nation, American History in VOA Special English. I'm Steve Ember. Today we tell about the period known as the Cold War. The Cold War began after World War II. The main enemies were the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War got its name because both sides were afraid of fighting each other directly. In a hot war, nuclear weapons might destroy everything. So instead, both sides fought each other indirectly. They supported opposing sides in conflicts in different parts of the world. They also used words as weapons. They threatened and denounced each other, or they tried to make each other look foolish. Over the years, leaders on both sides changed, yet the Cold War continued. It was the major force in world politics for most of the second half of the 20th century. The Cold War world was separated into 3 groups. The United States led the West. This group included countries with democratic political systems. The Soviet Union led the East. This group included countries with communist political systems. The non-aligned group included countries that did not want to be tied to either the West or the East. Harry Truman was the first American president to fight the Cold War. He used several policies. One was the Truman Doctrine. This was a plan to give money and military aid to countries threatened by communism. The Truman Doctrine effectively stopped communists from taking control of Greece and Turkey. Another policy was the Marshall Plan. This strengthened the economies and governments of countries in Western Europe. A major event in the Cold War was the Berlin Airlift. After World War II, the United States and its allies divided Germany. Berlin was a part of communist East Germany. The city was divided into East and West. In June 1948, Soviet-led forces blocked all roads and railways leading to the western part of Berlin. President Truman quickly ordered military airplanes to fly coal, food, and medicine to the city. The planes kept coming, sometimes landing every few minutes for more than a year. The United States received help from Britain and France. Together, they provided almost 2.5 million tons of supplies on about 280,000 flights. The United States also led the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949. NATO was a joint military group. Its purpose was to defend against Soviet forces in Europe. The Soviet Union and its East European allies formed their own joint military group, the Warsaw Pact, 6 years later. In 1953, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin died. His death gave the new American president, Dwight Eisenhower, a chance to deal with new Soviet leaders. In July 1955, Eisenhower and Nikolai Bulganin met in Geneva, Switzerland. The leaders of Britain and France also attended. Eisenhower proposed that the Americans and Soviets agreed to let their military bases be inspected by air by the other side. The Soviets later rejected the proposal. Yet, the meeting in Geneva was not considered a failure. After all, the leaders of the world's most powerful nations had shaken hands. Cold War tensions increased, then eased, then increased again over the years. The changes came as both sides attempted to influence political and economic developments around the world. For example, the Soviet Union provided military, economic, and technical aid to communist governments in Asia. The United States then helped 8 Asian nations fight communism by establishing the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, known as SEATO. In the 1950s, the United States began sending military advisors to help South Vietnam defend itself against communist North Vietnam. That aid would later expand into a long and bloody period of American involvement in Vietnam. The Cold War also affected the Middle East. In the 1950s, both East and West offered aid to Egypt to build the Aswan High Dam on the Nile River. The West canceled its offer, however, after Egypt bought weapons from the communist government in Czechoslovakia. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser then seized control of the company that operated the Suez Canal. A few months later, Israel invaded Egypt. France and Britain joined the invasion. For once, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed on a major issue. Both supported a United Nations resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire. The Suez Crisis was a political victory for the Soviets. When the Soviet Union supported Egypt, it gained new friends in the Arab world. In 1959, Cold War tensions eased a little. The new Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, visited Dwight Eisenhower in the United States. The meeting was very friendly. But the next year, relations got worse again. An American U-2 reconnaissance airplane was shot down over the Soviet Union. The plane and its pilot, Francis Gary Powers, were captured. Eisenhower admitted that such planes had been spying on the Soviets for years. In a speech at the United Nations, Khrushchev got so angry that he took off his shoe and beat it on a table. John F. Kennedy followed Eisenhower as president in 1961. During his early days in office, Cuban exiles invaded Cuba. It came to be known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. The forces wanted to oust the communist government of Fidel Castro. America's Central Intelligence Agency had provided training for the exiles. But the United States failed to send military planes to protect them during the invasion. As a result, almost all were killed or taken prisoner by Cuban forces trained and supported by the Soviet Union and Soviet allied nations. At the same time in Europe, tens of thousands of East Germans had been fleeing to the West. East Germany's government decided to stop them. It built a wall separating the eastern and western parts of the city of Berlin. Guards shot at anyone who tried to flee by climbing over. During Kennedy's second year in office, American intelligence reports discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
The Soviet Union denied the missiles were there. Yet American photographs taken from high in the air proved they were. America's ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson.
Let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no?
Mr. Stevenson, would you continue your statement, please? You will receive the answer in the due course. Do not worry.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I'm also prepared to present the evidence in this room.
The Cuban Missile Crisis easily could have resulted in a nuclear war. Americans felt especially threatened with those missiles just 150 kilometers from the Florida coast. But the crisis ended after a week. Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles if the United States agreed not to interfere in Cuba. Some progress was made in easing Cold War tensions when Kennedy was president. In 1963, the two sides reached a major arms control agreement. They agreed to ban tests of nuclear weapons above ground, underwater, and in space. They also established a direct telephone link between the White House and the Kremlin. Relations between East and West also improved when Richard Nixon was president. He and Leonid Brezhnev met several times. They reached several arms control agreements. One reduced the number of missiles used to shoot down enemy nuclear weapons. It also banned the testing and deployment of long-distance missiles for 5 years. A major change in the Cold War would take place in 1985 when Mikhail Gorbachev became leader of the Soviet Union. He met 4 times with President Ronald Reagan. Gorbachev withdrew Soviet forces from Afghanistan, and he signed an agreement with the United States to destroy all middle-distance and short-distance nuclear missiles. By 1989, there was widespread unrest in Eastern Europe. Gorbachev did not intervene as one Eastern European country after another cut its ties with the Soviet Union. The Berlin Wall, the major symbol of communist oppression, was torn down in November of that year. In less than a year, East and West Germany became one nation again. A few months after that, Warsaw Pact countries officially ended the alliance. The Cold War was over.
And that's our program for today. Listen again tomorrow to learn English through stories from around the world. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson.